You say a prayer. Go ahead now.
Our most gracious Father in heaven, we thank you for another day that you've given us to come and study your word, for your word itself, and the opportunity it gives us to learn about you, and most of all, the opportunity it gives us to be your children and have a chance to live with you forever. We would pray as he leads our study, help him to remember what he has to say, and help all of us to participate so we'll get the most from him. Please help to advise and make us better people for you. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. I like that Ellen included in prayer. Thank you for your word. Have you ever stopped to think about one of the things that we need to be most thankful for is the fact that God revealed himself to us? You know, not just through the creation, but then he actually revealed himself to us through his word. That's pretty cool. All right, I'm on the catch-up side of things here. I'm trying to catch up with you guys, and not entirely sure everything that Tommy covered. I'm sure he did a great job. I don't want to recover a bunch of ground, but I do want to ask this. What is primarily going on in the book of Numbers in chapters 1 through 10? What would you say that's all about? What is Israel doing? What is God having Israel do in these chapters? Yeah, it's preparation to enter into the promised land, because that's God's intent. The 40 years wandering in the wilderness, that's not God's intent. That's a result of their refusal to go into the land, their lack of faith in God. That's where the 40 years comes in, or the wilderness wandering. But what God is doing is He is establishing His army, if you will. You notice that they numbered all the tribes, and then they gave the order of the camp for those tribes. And what's in the very center of the camp? What?
God's presence.
Yeah, God's presence, the tabernacle, the throne of God. He would come down and he would rest between the cherubim over the mercy seat. Okay? And so they're arrayed around it. Okay? So outside the camp, of course, you have the unclean. Then you have the tribes, the 12 tribes. And then what's the next concentric ring? Who does that consist of?
The Levites.
The Levites, right? What were the Levites charged to do? What was their primary function surrounding the tabernacle?
Take care of it.
To what?
Take care of all the stuff.
Okay, that's going to be on the move. But in the camp, their primary duty was to make sure nobody approached the tabernacle. And they had the authority to kill those who tried to approach the tabernacle unauthorized. And then, of course, right there at the front of the tabernacle, you had Aaron and his children, the priesthood. Okay? And so you have the unclean, the clean, the sanctified Levites. We're going to talk about those a little bit tonight. And then you've got the priesthood, and then you've got the throne room, so to speak. Okay? And this is how God lined up their camp. Then also, he gives the orders for the march. And we're going to read about that tonight. And how they are to march when he leads them through the wilderness. Where's the first place they're going to go after they leave Mount Sinai? It's a 3-day journey to where?
Paran.
Yeah, the wilderness of Paran. Okay? Which is south of the Dead Sea. Okay, it's east of Jerusalem, south of the Dead Sea. Of course, Jerusalem just doesn't really exist yet. The Jebusites are in the place which is going to be called Jerusalem. And so, God is preparing His people to enter that promised land. He is preparing them for the fulfillment of His promises. And things are really moving along quickly here. Now, Tommy said that you covered the first 4 chapters last week, didn't really get to chapter 5. So real quickly, what are the 3 primary things we're reading about in chapter 5? Further laws are given, and what's the first set of laws about? The unclean are to be put without the camp. Okay? This doesn't mean that they're eternally banished. They would have to go through the rituals of cleansing to be allowed back inside the camp. This was a spiritual lesson. It's kind of like a spiritual barrier, indicating that to come before God, an individual has to be pure, has to be cleansed, has to be holy as the Lord their God is holy. And God demonstrated these things, or illustrated these things, if you will, through physical cleanliness in a lot of ways. Okay? Then the second brief set of laws here, given in chapter 5, concern what? Yeah, confessions of sin and restitution that might need to be made. You know, the idea is they would restore what was taken plus, I think, a fifth. Okay? And so the idea is, okay, if you've defrauded somebody, if you've sinned somehow, taken advantage of a situation, you would make restitution plus a fifth, and that would be the penalty for it. And then the last one, the longest set here in chapter 5, concerns what?
Jealous husband.
The jealous husband, right? And suspicion of adultery. And again, this is one of those sets of laws that reminds me of the set of laws concerning the cleansing of a leper, right? Just all these arcane things, that go on in here, where she's got to drink the bitter water, and if her belly swells, her abdomen swells, then she's guilty. If it doesn't, then she's innocent. Definitely a patriarchal society, isn't it? Definitely favors the man throughout this society and throughout their history. Can anybody come up with any reason why those sets of laws might be placed here in the book of Numbers? I mean, I get the unclean being put without the camp. He's purifying his people. He's getting them ready to enter into the promised land. Restitution, I can see that a little bit. He's wanting everybody to be right with one another, right with God. And then this jealousy, the husband's jealousy, and the woman being suspected of maybe committing adultery. Anybody got any thoughts on that? Carrie?
One, they're getting ready for war, so the men are about to go out to war, so sometimes that's when that can come up. 2, you have just the keeping the tribes, the inheritance, keeping all that pure.
Right.
Where if you're going to get pregnant and mess all that up, so there's purity there, and also what they're about to do, just kind of a warning.
Okay.
To them as the men are about to head out to war.
All right, Carrie's talking about the idea that, situations might come up if you've got different men going out to war, fighting battles and what have you. You might have some individuals who would be inclined to stray. You also have the idea of, look, these tribes are going to go in and they're going to inherit the land, right? And that land is going to be allotted by what? By family. Okay, so you want to keep that pure. And I wonder also if this is an indication of just the sanctity of marriage. One of these things that God is instituting. I mean, by the time you get to the end of the Old Testament, in the book of Malachi, God just comes around and says, I hate divorce. You have covered the altar with the tears of the wife of your youth. You betrayed the wife of your youth. The Jews were guilty of marrying a young woman, basically using up her what people might call her best years, and then discarding her, for somebody else, and dealing treacherously with the wife. And I don't understand that, because when you really love someone, don't they get better with age? I mean, really. We're not talking about necessarily necessarily in the physical sense. We all start to fall apart. But when you're in love with somebody, I mean, it's just, you grow so much closer. And that person that you're married to is just as good looking or just as beautiful as they were when the day you married them. And, so God is protecting this institution. Tommy.
Verse 14 is interesting to me in that God describes adultery as defilement. It says if the woman has actually committed adultery, then she has defiled herself.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Tommy is bringing up verse 14 in chapter 5. If the spirit of jealousy comes upon him and he becomes jealous of his wife who has defiled herself, or if the spirit of jealousy comes upon him and he becomes jealous of his wife, although she has not defiled herself. Okay, there's two things here. There's one, if a woman is unfaithful, she has defiled herself. She has become unclean. Okay? But then also, it mentions jealousy here twice as well. The spirit of jealousy comes upon her husband. What's that going to do to their society? What is that going to do to the family unit? It will destroy it, as sure as anything. And the same thing is absolutely true today. All of you probably know individuals who have forsaken their vows, they have been unfaithful to their spouse. They were the only one affected by it, right? No, not by a long shot. I mean, not only them, their spouse, their children, possibly their grandchildren, their friends, their neighbors, their brethren, their parents, their relatives. It destroys families. And what a wonderful thing it is if two people can be reconciled who have undergone such a thing.
But Craig, that highlights to me that, or draws makes the point to me that oftentimes I think of the defilement that's enumerated in the Old Testament as being a physical thing. But this defilement, the defilement of adultery, was a spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
She has defiled herself spiritually, and it permeates to all the people you just enumerated. That bad feeling is a defilement to the people of God. God is saying, if you defile yourself with a skin rash, or if you defile yourself by touching a dead body, or if you defile yourself by adultery, you cannot be in our midst.
Yeah, very good point. The jealousy it engenders, the hurt that it engenders, and this defiles a whole number of people, okay, in a sense. Anita?
I know it sounds like it's a man's world, but I think also this is protection for the woman. She's got an unreasonable husband, so he accused her all the time. It puts her in the clear. It puts their relationship where it should be.
Yeah, very good. Anita points out that this also protects the women. Because you've got some irrational husband, some incredibly jealous, possessive, controlling husband. And you've still got people like that today. Red flags go up when you're dating the wrong guy, right? And what this does is this protects her because it demonstrates and proves her innocence, okay, going through this. A lot of times people forget that, God told Moses that if a man is going to put away his wife, to give her a certificate of divorce. This wasn't to make it easy for the man to divorce his wife. This was to protect the woman. Because if she hasn't got that, can he accuse her of adultery? Certainly, right? And then he also says, if you divorce a woman and she becomes a husband of another man, you can never take her back. You can never take her back. And that's an abomination. And so, God is actually still trying to protect the women as well. Okay, anybody got anything else to add to chapter 5 before we move on? Okay, let's take a look at chapter 6 through 10 here. In 2 words, what does chapter 6 deal with?
That's right, Val.
Nazarite vows. Okay? These are the 10 vows for the Nazarite. Now I want you to notice something about, well, that's not until chapter 7. Okay, chapter 6, the Nazarite vows. What's the word, where does the word Nazarite originate from? Nazar. What does that mean? Anybody do any research? It means separate. Okay? So someone who takes a Nazarite vow is separating themselves from something or from the other people or common people by taking this vow. Now, who is allowed to take this vow? Anyone, male or female. Okay? We think about Samson the Nazarite. Some people suggest that Samuel may have been a Nazarite, dedicated to the Lord by his mother Hannah. Okay? But the idea is anybody could enter into this vow and take this vow. And the vow itself, might be to abstain from something. It might be to do something. It might be to behave in a certain way or act in a certain way. And how long did the vow last? As long as they wanted to. It could be a vow for 3 days. It could be a vow for 3 years. The Mishnah talks about a queen of Israel who took a vow, and the vow lasted 7 years. But before it was completed, just before it was completed, she was defiled by a dead body. And so, what happens if a Nazarite is defiled before the completion of their vow? They got to start over. And so she had to keep that vow another 7 years to fulfill it. And the idea is, you make a vow to God, you don't break it. Okay, you're bound to it. Now, what were the specific regulations regarding Nazarites?
No strong drink, don't cut your hair, and can't touch the dead.
Yeah, can't touch dead. It's just like the high priest. You couldn't defile yourself for family members. Okay? Nothing that has to do with the grape or the fruit of the vine. Nothing that comes to vine, whether it's raisins, whether it's grapes, whether it's grape juice, whether it's wine, okay, or strong drink. Now, Alan brings up the idea of strong drink, and that is an accurate translation in verse 3. The New King James says, he shall separate himself from wine and similar drink. He shall drink neither vinegar made from wine nor vinegar made from similar drink. Neither shall he drink any grape juice or eat fresh grapes or raisins. The idea of similar drink, similar is in italics here. I think the ESV says strong drink, and this is strong. Now, some people say within the context, the difference might be between new wine and old wine. Of course, old wine would be fermented, whereas the new wine, the best wine, was freshly squeezed from the grape. However, as you go through this, we've talked about this before, the Bible talks about strong drink, talks about they had intoxicating drink. Okay? So he has to keep himself from that. And he shall eat nothing produced by the grapevine from seed to skin. Now notice verse 5 here. All the days of the vow of his separation, no razor shall come upon his head, until the days are fulfilled for which he separated himself to the Lord. He shall be holy. Then he shall let the locks of the hair of his head grow. All the days that he separates himself to the Lord, he shall not go near a dead body. So is the woman supposed to shave her head at the fulfillment of her vow? Paul, when he talks about head covering, says it's a shame for a woman to be shorn. Of course, this is hundreds and hundreds of years later in the Greek culture. But there's nothing to indicate in this chapter to indicate that a woman wouldn't have to shave her head as well. Okay? And then that hair was offered on the altar. Anybody in the New Testament we know of had such a vow? John the Baptist, perhaps.
Paul in him, Paul.
Yeah, Paul. Paul, take a look at chapter 18 in the book of Acts. Now, Paul certainly was a Christian, yet chapter 18 of Acts says he had taken a vow. After he leaves Corinth, in chapter 18, it says in verse 18, so Paul still remained a good while, then he took leave of the brethren and sailed for Syria. Priscilla and Aquila were with him. He had his hair cut off as in Tria, for he had taken a vow. We don't know what this vow was. It certainly sounds like it was a Nazirite type vow. And once it was fulfilled, he cuts his hair off. Now, I also want you to take a look over here at Acts chapter 21, beginning in verse 23. Paul comes to Jerusalem. You got to remember, he wanted to teach the Passover in Jerusalem. So he comes to Jerusalem, and there's accusations by Christian Jews that he is teaching Jews all over the world to forsake Moses. And of course, there were a lot of Christian Jews who still felt like they needed to follow some of the commands of Moses. In verse 21, James says to him, but they have been informed about you that you teach all the Jews who are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses, saying they ought not to circumcise your children, nor to walk according to the customs. What then? The assembly must certainly meet, for they will hear that you have come. Therefore, do what we tell you. We have 4 men who have taken a vow. Take them and be purified with them, and pay their expenses, so that they may shave their heads, and that all may know those things of which they were informed concerning you are nothing, but that you yourself also walk orderly and keep the law. Yeah, you've got this transition period in the book of Acts, where you've got a lot of Jewish Christians that feel like they need to keep certain aspects of the Levitical law. Paul, of course, makes it clear. The council at Jerusalem in chapter 15 made it clear that, hey, you can't bind these things on the Gentiles. And really, you can't bind them on anybody. However, it doesn't mean that you can't follow these things. So Paul may have taken a Nazirite vow. These 4 Christian men may have taken a Nazirite vow. And this was something that an individual could do on their own, of their own accord, to dedicate themselves to God for a certain amount of time. In verse 12 of Numbers chapter 6, says, he shall consecrate to the Lord the days of his separation, and bring a male lamb in its first year as a trespass offering. But the former days shall be lost, because his separation was defiled. So that's talking about the idea, if something happens, you become unclean, then you got to start all over. Now, you can be cleansed, but you got to start all over. Notice the days of his separation. This is where the word Nazirite comes from, be separate. So these are individuals who have taken upon themselves voluntarily to make a vow to God. It might be fasting for a number of days. It might be, any number of things. Of course, was it Jephthah that made a vow in the book of Judges? Was he one of the judges that vowed, whatever comes out of my house to greet me, I will offer up to the Lord? What's the first thing that came out of his house? Yeah, his daughter, right? And I am not entirely sure how that situation resolved itself. Okay? And I'm not going to speculate either. But he was devastated when his daughter came out to greet him because he had made that vow. You make a vow, you can't break it.
Hey, Craig.
Yeah.
Along those lines, Proverbs 20:25 says, it is a snare for a man to vote rashly something as holy, and afterward to reconsider his vow.
Uh-huh. Yeah, exactly. Where was that? Proverbs
20:25.
Proverbs 20:25 tells us to consider carefully what we vow. And then don't vow something and change your mind.
And they did this for the Lord, to separate themselves so they could serve God and be focused on God.
Yeah, that's
So
exactly.
it wasn't just to take a vow, but to do it for the Lord.
Right. I got a question here that come up. Why did God allow Nazarite vows? Why did God allow just anybody in Israel to take a Nazarite vow? Any thoughts on that? You think it's possible? Go ahead, sir.
Could be nothing more than God recognizing that there are people who are wanting to honor Him through their actions. And God said, "Time, this is how you're going to do it."
Okay. Do you think it might be possible there were people in Israel who would really like to have served as priests, but couldn't, just because their father wasn't Aaron? Do you suppose maybe there's some people in Israel that maybe would have, liked to fulfill the duties of a Levite, but couldn't because they weren't Levites? You look at some of the things that are required of those who take a Nazarite vow, and very similar to the things required of a high priest. So this gives people that opportunity to serve in a very special way. And God is allowing them to do that. I thought that was kind of an interesting comment that I came across as I was studying this. All right. Okay, verse 23, verses 22 through 27, we have what is titled in my Bible, the priestly blessing. Speak to Aaron and his son, saying, "This is the way you shall bless the children of Israel. Say that the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. So they shall put my name on the children of Israel, and I will bless them." Any of you heard that blessing before? Very, very familiar blessing. And this is how God told the priesthood they were to bless the people. It's a beautiful blessing. All right, anybody got anything else to comment about chapter 6? So we're getting ready to enter the promised land. We're going to make provision for those who want to separate themselves even further in their dedication to God. So then that brings us into chapter 7. So what's going on in chapter 7? Chapter 7 is a pretty long chapter, isn't it? Chapter 7 runs to 89 verses. Why is chapter 7 so long?
Because whoever decided the chapter decided to make it long.
Because there's 12 tribes.
Because there's 12 leaders of the tribes, and they're all bringing their offering to God. They're bringing their offering to God, and God is recording and accounting for the offering of each leader. Now, did all these leaders bring something different? No, they all brought the exact same thing. Yet God records what every single leader brought, even though it's the exact same thing. He records it 12 times. This is what they brought for their offering. Another question I have, was this offering solely from the leader, or was it from the tribe? I kind of suspect it was from the tribe, but I don't know. The leaders are the heads of the father's house of each tribe, and they themselves may have been fairly well off as the heads of these houses. But each one brings these things. Now, 6 covered carts and 12 oxen is what they start off with. Okay. The leaders collectively bring 6 covered carts and 12 oxen. So, who gets the carts? The Gershonites and the Merarites. Okay. How many did the Gershonites get? They got 2. What do the Gershonites carry?
wall.
all software, okay? The Merarites get 4 cars, and they carry all the hardware. And so, heavier burden possibly, much more hardware. And so they get 4 cars versus the 2 cars. When they set out to march, by the way, and I'm really kind of jumping ahead here, who leads the way?
The Ark of the Covenant.
The Ark of the Covenant. It talks about the Ark of the Covenant. Now, I think that's the way it goes, but I'm also a little confused by it. Okay. It says Judah takes off first. Judah takes off first. Let me go back to my chart here. You got Judah takes off first, then Issachar, then Zebulun. Those are the 3 tribes to the east. Then after them come Reuben, Simeon, and Gad. They're the 3 tribes to the south. Then after them, I believe it's the Merarites, and then the Gershonites, and then the Kohathites. Have you ever thought about that order? What's the point of the Merarites and the Gershonites going before the Kohathites?
There's that temple first.
Yeah, okay. They're building the tabernacle while the Kohathites are still approaching. Okay. So that when the Kohathites, what are the Kohathites carrying?
Holy thing.
They're carrying all the holy things. So when they arrive, they can place them in the tabernacle. Now, it says that the Ark of the Covenant goes before them. So I'm wondering, what are they doing with the Ark while the tabernacle is being, built? The Ark, I imagine they set it down. I have no idea what they do with it. Do the Kohathites just stand there, hold it on their shoulders? But it goes before them, and it was supposed to go before them in battle as well. So it stands to reason it goes first. But then the Kohathites, they catch up. You got to understand, we're talking about 186,400 men in the vanguard, followed by 151,450 men after them, followed then by the Gershonites and the Merarites, or the Merarites and the Gershonites, and then the Kohathites. Long caterpillar, right? Moving through the wilderness. They did not travel as a mob like their camp. They traveled in a stretched out line. And then it took them a while for the tail end to catch up with the leaders. I thought that was kind of interesting because it's just showing the practical nature of God's order of march. Now, the reason I bring it up in chapter 7, when the leaders come to present their gifts, you notice anything about how they come? If you read it carefully, they come in their exact same order of march. Judah comes first, followed by Issachar, followed by Zebulun, followed by Reuben, and Simeon, and Gad. And so they all come in a distinct order. And these sacrifices take place over a period of 12 days. And so there's a lot of symbolism there. Okay? Go back up to verse 1 of chapter 7. Now it came to pass when Moses had finished setting up the tabernacle that he anointed it and sanctified it in all its furnishings, and the altar and all its utensils. So he anointed them and sanctified them. Then the leaders of Israel, the heads of their fathers' houses, who were the leaders of the tribes over those who were numbered, made an offering. What's the time frame here, chapter 7? Where are these offerings taking place?
Okay.
Well, they're taking place for 12 days, but they're taking place after Moses set up the tabernacle. They're taking place all the way back in Exodus chapter 40. So what we've got is we've got Leviticus talking about the priesthood and establishing that, establishing the people to be holy. Then you've got these instructions preparing the people, and now you go back in time, that here's what happened when Moses set up the tabernacle. And so the writer, Moses, is putting these things in order in which is readers can understand how they unfold and why they unfold a little bit this way. But he's going back and he's saying, here's what the leaders did. And so, verse 7, 2 cars, 4 oxen, he gave the sons of Gershon according to their service. Verse 8, 4 cars and 8 oxen, he gave the sons of Merari according to their service, under the hand of Ithamar, the son of Aaron, the priest. But the sons of Kohath, he gave none. Why did they not get any cars?
Carried on their shoulders.
Because they carried everything on their shoulders. Okay? All right. So we have the princes, or the leaders of the tribes, presenting their offering in the order of their march. And in verse 89, now when Moses went into the tabernacle of meeting to speak with him, he heard the voice of one speaking to him from above the mercy seat that was on the ark of the testimony, from between the two cherubim. Thus he spoke to him. So, after all of the sacrifice, and what is all of the sacrifice specifically for in chapter 7? What was it to dedicate?
You mean the kind of sacrifices?
All these sacrifices that the leaders of the tribes are bringing are used to dedicate the altar. Okay, the altar of burnt offering. And that's what they're bringing them for. And so we've got each of the tribal leaders brings an offering of 1 silver platter, 1 silver bowl, 1 gold pan, 1 bull, 1 ram, 1 male lamb, 1 kid of the goats, 2 oxen, 5 rams, 5 male goats, and 5 male lambs. And so for 12 days, one leader would make his dedication offering for the altar. And they did that in the order of their march. And then afterward, God speaks to Moses from above the mercy seat to give further instructions. Okay, we got anything to add to chapter 7 or questions about it? Now, you go through Exodus, you go through Leviticus, you go through Numbers here, and all these sacrifices and all these different ins and outs and rules and regulations. Does anybody ever able to keep those straight? It's like, it's a Gordian knot. You know, how all these things, and some of the ways they're worded, some of the ways they're worded, some of the ways they're phrased, they were certainly important to God. But I've said this before, I sure am thankful for one sacrifice. You know, and that's Christ. And, you know, we're warned in the 50th Psalm as those who have entered into a covenant with God by sacrifice. Not a bull, not a ram, not a goat, but the Son of God. And when we were baptized, we entered into that covenant by means of his sacrifice. And I'm so very thankful for that. If there is a big underlying meaning to each and every little element of these sacrifices, I don't understand it. I don't get it. I don't see it. And perhaps there are Jewish scholars that have studied these things for years that can give you an idea of what they're for. But if the scriptures themselves don't tell you specifically why God is having you do something, the best you got is speculation. And just realize that the way to God without Christ was very, very complex. And it emphasized purity. And it emphasized the difficulty of it. And that's one of the reasons we need to be so thankful for the New Testament. All right, chapter 8. What's chapter 8 about? Yeah, the Levites. It's the consecration of the Levites for service in regard to the tabernacle. And again, we're going to talk about how the firstborn all belong to God, and how the Levites take the place of the firstborn that weren't killed during the Passover. And the Levites here are given as a gift to Aaron and his sons to do the work of the tabernacle for the children of Israel and to make atonement for the children of Israel. So the Levites themselves are kind of like living sacrifices. They were given to Aaron in this order for the work of the tabernacle. What's the work of the tabernacle?
Just a bunch of, we talked about this last week, just a bunch of setting it up and all that, is that what you mean?
Yeah, there's a bunch of setting up, there's a bunch of taking down. But let's say it's set up and they stay in one place for a year. Okay, is there still work with the tabernacle? What about all the firewood? What about all the water? What about removing ashes? What about taking things outside the camp to be burned? It wasn't always the priest who had to do that. The idea of dealing with all the animals. I mean, you had people coming to make sacrifices on this altar. It wasn't just a Saturday job. It was an all-day job every day, where people were coming, and these priests, it's full-time. They're sacrificing these animals. And I'm telling you, you take a full-grown bull, and you're going to sacrifice that, and then you got to quarter it or cut it up in different pieces, make sure who gets what and what have you. The priests have got their handful. Well, you got the Levites, and they have the ability to, all right, we're going to organize these animals, sacrifices, we're going to corral them, we're going to herd them, whatever. The firewood, the water, as I say, just maintaining a clean courtyard in the tabernacle. We're talking about a lot of work. Okay? Very, very, very insignificant comparison. But does this building clean itself? No. We have people that come down, they volunteer to come down, and they vacuum the carpet. You know, they pick up the stuff that's left in the auditorium. They clean up the classroom. They take out the trash. There's work to be done just by virtue of the fact that we've got a meeting place and we meet together as a church. Can you imagine what would be involved with the work of the tabernacle? And so this relieves Aaron and the priesthood of a lot of work. Okay, what were the age requirements of the Levites?
30 to 50.
30 to 50, okay? 30 to 50, but we're also going to read 25 to 50. So how do you reconcile the two?
25 to 30, would that be preparation for 30 to 50?
Quite possibly. I believe that 30 to 50, they could participate in taking down and then erecting the tabernacle. But until they were 30, they couldn't do that. Yet from 25 to 30, they could participate in the work of the tabernacle. And things need to be done. I think about it as kind of an apprenticeship. Okay? Now, once a Levite turned 50, what was he doing? Retiring. He was retiring from the physical work. What were you saying, Alan?
I said they put him out in the pasture.
They put him out pastor. He becomes a supervisor, basically. He just kind of supervises a little bit about what's going on. He's not doing any of the physical work, and we're going to see that as well. So, first off, the Levites are taken, and they're cleansed ceremonially. In verse 7, thus you shall do to them to cleanse them, sprinkle water of purification on them, and let them shave all their body, and let them wash their clothes, and so make themselves clean. Kind of interesting. I mean, that's definitely a cleansing. In verse 9, you shall bring the Levites before the tabernacle of meeting. You shall gather together the whole assembly of the children of Israel. So you shall bring the Levites before the Lord, and the children of Israel shall lay their hands on the Levites. And Aaron shall offer the Levites before the Lord as though a wave offering from the children of Israel, that they may perform the work of the Lord. Then the Levites shall lay their hands on the heads of the young bulls, and you shall offer one as a sin offering, and the other as a burnt offering to the Lord, to make atonement for the Levites. And you shall stand the Levites before Aaron and his sons, and then offer them as though a wave offering to the Lord. Thus you shall separate the Levites from among the children of Israel, and the Levites shall be mine. So there's these levels of dedication here. And so, to be at the tribe of Levi could be considered a great blessing, a great honor. To be at the priesthood, a great blessing and a great honor. Go back to the Nazarite vow. It allows everyone. have in honor, if you will. In verse 15, after that, the Levites shall go into the service to the tabernacle of meeting, so you shall cleanse them and offer them as though a wave offering. Verse 19, I have given the Levites as a gift to Aaron and his sons from among the children of Israel to do the work for the children of Israel in the tabernacle of meeting, and make atonement for the children of Israel, if there be no plague among the children of Israel, and the children of Israel come near the sanctuary. There's the protective nature of it. And in verse 24, this is what pertains to the Levites. From 25 years old and above, one may enter to perform service in the work of the tabernacle of meeting. And at the age of 50 years, they must cease performing this work and shall work no more. They may minister with their brethren in the tabernacle of meeting to attend to needs, but they themselves shall do no work. Thus you shall do to the Levites regarding their duties. So once the Levite reaches 50, he basically becomes an overseer or a supervisor. He is a servant to the rest of the Levites in directing the work and how they would be able to do that. Chapter 9 deals with what?
Second Passover.
Did you read both bills?
It should just be one.
Okay. But I'm hearing people out there, shame. All right, next week we'll get to chapter 9 and chapter 10. And then we'll start the march.
We're going to sing all three verses, 5, 9, 7. If the skies above your rain are crystal blue, if your face and mercy gray all the way through, there's a silver light that shines into every land. Look by faith and see your friend, trust His promises grand. Sing and you'll be happy that you press along the goal. Trust in Him, believe God, and He is in your soul. Let the world away be found, look to Jesus and pray. Lift your voice and praise His song. Sing, be happy today. Walk with joy your trouble and time, sing with sorrow and pain. There are others living in sin, blessed with earthly gain. Take new courage, we God's help, what the Lord may bring. When the dark clouds and joy, then your truth can sing. Sing and now be happy, press along to the goal. Trust in Him, believe promise, and He is will. Sing your soul, let the world away be grateful. Look to Jesus and pray. Lift your voice and praise His song. Sing, be happy today. What we fail to see the rainbow up in heaven's fair sky. When it seems our fortunes are frown and pass us by. There are things we know that are worth more than silver and gold. If we hope and trust each day, we shall have pleasure untold. Sing and be happy, press along to the goal. Trust in Him, believe promise, and He is will. Sing your soul, let the world away be grateful. Look to Jesus and pray. Lift your voice and praise His song. Sing, be happy today.
Good evening. It's good to see everyone here tonight. Thank you for coming out for a period of Bible study. To our guests, you're most welcome, and please come back and be with us on Sunday mornings at 9 a.m. for Bible study, and then followed by worship at 10. Here's just a few notes on some of our members. Denny and Diane are not with us tonight. Denny had a COVID test yesterday in preparation for his EP heart study on Friday, so they're quarantining until that study is over with. They're at home tonight. Austin is out of town, Austin Bray, and Sarah's having some discomfort with her pregnancy. The baby's riding a little high and pressing against her lungs, and she's got some discomfort, so she's home tonight. Logan is supervising Sharon and Stuart tonight, I see. Pray for both Sarah and Noemi during their pregnancies. We've got Lucas is hosting a prayer time on the internet Zoom application. It's going to be on Monday nights and Friday nights at 6 p.m. for anybody that'd like to join. It's going to last for about 10 minutes. And on Monday nights, they're going to read the chapters from Proverbs and then pray together. Friday nights, they'll read from Psalms and then pray together. It's not intended to be a class. It's simply a way for them people to come together and pray for each other and build each other up during the week. Whether or not you can join, please email or text Lucas if you have any specific prayer request. Is there anything else we need to mention tonight before we're dismissed? Okay, we'll be closed in prayer.
Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we are thankful for the opportunity to come together tonight and study your word. As we continue to study, we pray that we gain a greater understanding of your glory. and that we grow closer to you. Be with those in the congregation who are traveling and who are battling medical condition. Lord, help us to go into the world this week and be good examples of your grace. It is in your Son's name we pray. Amen.